The snow had been falling for 3 days without stopping, and Lyra Ashvane was on her knees in the middle of it. She had stopped counting the wolves at 12. They had come from the trees the way shadows come, not all at once, but gradually, each one stepping from the dark between the pines until the circle was complete, and the clearing contained nothing except her and the cold and the sound of 12 sets of lungs breathing in the frozen air. She could see the condensation. That was how close they were, close enough to smell the iron and pine resin of them. Close enough that, when the largest one exhaled, the vapor touched her face like a second wind. She was holding a stake. She had sharpened it herself 3 hours ago against a piece of basalt on the ridge. Her hands had not shaken. They were not shaking now, which she thought was strange, given everything. The stake was the length of her forearm and would do absolutely nothing. At the far edge of the circle, where the tree line broke into open ground, something stood that had no business existing. A wolf the size of a cart horse, gray as old iron, enormous, unhurried with eyes that burned pale blue, the cold blue of lantern glass in a winter window. It was not moving. It was watching her with the patience of something that had been watching for a very long time. Above the ridge, she heard it before she saw it, the creak and tramp of a war column, 400 soldiers cresting the frozen rise with torches guttering against the snow wind. She heard the order to halt. She heard 400 pairs of boots stop moving simultaneously. She did not look up. She looked at the great wolf. And something she had been carrying her entire life, something she had no name for, a pull behind her sternum like a hook set in her rib cage, went suddenly, terrifyingly slack. She placed the stake in the snow. She raised both hands, palms open, fingers spread. Her lips began to move. She was 5 the first time a wolf followed her home. It had come from the eastern field at dusk, keeping its distance, its great gray head low and its tail still, not threatening, simply present, simply there in the way that a thing is there when it belongs. Lyra had thought it was the most beautiful creature she had ever seen. She had stopped walking and looked at it across the frozen mud of the Veldmore Road, and something in her small chest had recognized something in it, the way you recognize a word in a language you were never taught. Her mother had seen it from the doorway. She had not said anything. She had simply taken Lyra by the wrist, pulled her inside, and bolted the door with a speed that told Lyra everything about what kind of gift she had just revealed herself to be carrying. By morning, Veldmore had a name for her. By winter, she understood what it meant to live inside it. The howls were not sound the way rain was sound, or wind, or the creak of the Veldmore gate in winter. They were something else. Something that arrived not in the ears but in the chest, low and resonant, like a word spoken in the room directly behind the one you were standing in. Close enough to feel through the wall, too muffled to make out clearly, not muffled enough to ignore. Lyra had heard it her whole life, and she had never told anyone, because she understood instinctively, the way children understand the things that will cost them, that this was not the kind of thing Veldmore wanted to know about her. She went to the eastern pasture at night when the house was quiet. Not every night, often enough. She would sit at the fence line with her back against the post and her knees drawn up, and she would wait until the howling started in the far tree line, and then she would listen to the thing beneath it. The meaning that was not quite words. The presence that was not quite voices. She had spent years trying to find the right description and had never managed it. It was less like language and more like weather, a pressure system moving through her, carrying information she couldn't always name but always, always understood. She whispered back, simple things at first, I hear you, I see you, you can go. She felt ridiculous doing it, a girl of 9 talking to the dark at the edge of a sheep pasture. But the wolves always quieted when she spoke, always moved back from the fence line, always, eventually, left. She had spent considerable time wondering why a village that feared wolves considered it a curse that she could make them leave. She had not spent too long on the question. Answers of that shape led to other questions, and other questions led to things she could not unknow, and there were enough of those already. She was 13 when the rabbit appeared. She woke before dawn to a sound at her window, not a knock, not a scratch, just a soft weight settling on the sill. She opened the shutter and found it there, A winter hare, freshly killed, laid with a neatness that no wolf's mouth should have been capable of. Clean, deliberate, a gift arranged by something that understood the concept of giving. She stood at the window for a long time in the cold dark, her breath fogging the air, looking at the rabbit and understanding several things simultaneously. That the gift was real. That it had always been real. That the thing living in her chest, the thing that heard meaning in howls and spoke comfort into darkness, was not a symptom of something wrong with her, but the shape of something that existed on purpose. She took the rabbit into the garden and buried it before her mother woke. Then she went inside, and she decided, carefully and completely, that none of it existed at all. It happened on a Tuesday, which struck Lyra afterward as the most ordinary detail of the whole thing. Not a storm night, not a blood moon, not any of the dramatic conditions Veldmore preferred for its cruelties. A flat gray Tuesday in late autumn, the square full of people buying bread and salted fish, a child's small brown dog trotting between the market stalls. The wolf came from the alley beside the tanner's shop. It was thin and fast, and it was gone before anyone had finished drawing breath, the dog with it, and the child standing in the square making a sound that Lyra would not forget for a long time. She was across the square when it happened. She had not called anything. She had been thinking about whether the price of lamp oil had gone up again. It did not matter. Corvath was already looking at her by the time the child's sound became words, and his expression had the quality of a man arriving somewhere he had been trying to reach for years. He was the pack elder, gray-haired, thick through the shoulders, with a mouth that had settled into a permanent downward line sometime around when Lyra had turned 8, and he had first called her parents into his hall to discuss the problem of their daughter. He pointed at her across the square with one extended finger, slow and deliberate. The way you point at something you want everyone to see. She called them, he said. She always calls them. The square went quiet. Lyra looked at her father. He was standing 12 feet away with a wrapped parcel under his arm and his eyes fixed on the middle distance, on nothing, on a point in the air just to the left of her face. She looked at her mother, who was studying the ground with the focused attention of a woman reading scripture. The silence between them stretched out and did not break. She had known this was possible. She had known it for years, had shaped her entire life around preventing it, had kept her voice low and her eyes down and her birthmark hidden, had buried a rabbit in the garden at 13 to protect the fragile fiction that she was simply a girl, just a girl, nothing unusual, nothing to see. She had been very careful. It had not mattered either. They gave her an hour. A half loaf of bread that was 2 days old, her father's hunting knife in a worn leather sheath, and the direction south, toward the Ashvane Pass, which everyone from Veldmore to the capital understood was wolf country in deep winter, and therefore not survivable for a person traveling alone. The gate was heavy timber banded with iron, and it made a sound when it closed behind her that she felt in her back teeth. The snow was already falling. She did not cry. She adjusted the knife on her belt, tucked the bread inside her coat, and walked south, and the extraordinary thing, the thing she would not understand until much later, was how little she wanted to go back. The Ashvane Pass was the kind of beautiful that did not care whether you lived or died in it. The pines were enormous, old growth, their branches carrying snow in great silent weights that dropped without warning and hit the ground like something falling from a roof. The light came in sideways and pale, the way winter light does when the sun has given up on the idea of warmth and is simply fulfilling an obligation. The silence was total except for wind and the occasional percussion of snow releasing from branches, and Lyra moved through it by daylight and stopped moving when the light failed, burrowing into the shelter of fallen timber with her coat pulled tight and the knife in her hand and the half-loaf growing staler by the meal. She had known she was being tracked since the first morning. It was not a sound or a sight. It was the pull, the thread behind her sternum that she had spent 4 years pretending did not exist, drawn taut now and humming faintly, like a bowstring that has been plucked and not yet stilled. Something was behind her. Something was moving when she moved and stopping when she stopped and maintaining a distance that felt less like a predator's calculation and more like a consideration. She did not look back. Looking back felt like acknowledging it, and she was not ready to do that yet. On the second night, the eyes appeared at the tree line. Blue-white, enormous, set low in the darkness between two pines at a height that made no sense, too high for any wolf she had ever seen, too steady for any animal that meant harm. They did not advance. They did not retreat. They simply existed at the edge of her firelight with a patience that was almost geological, the patience of something that had been waiting long enough that a few more hours meant nothing at all. Lyra sat with her back against the timber and her knife across her knees, and she did not sleep. By dawn, the eyes were gone. She could not have said when they left. On the third morning, she found a piece of fallen branch, dense and straight, and she sharpened it against a piece of basalt until it had a point she respected. She worked slowly. The work gave her something to do with her hands while she thought through the question she had been avoiding. What she was willing to do, if it came to it. The honest answer arrived without drama and settled in her chest with the weight of something true. She did not think she could kill one of them. Not because she doubted her own capability, not because her hands weren't steady or her nerve wasn't good. Because in 17 years of being blamed for every wolf that had ever come near Veldmore, not one of them had ever actually hurt her. Not one. They came close. They watched. They left gifts on windowsills and followed her home in the dusk. They had done nothing to her that deserved death. She held the stake and looked at the tree line and understood, with a cold clarity that felt less like fear and more like arrival, that this had always been the question underneath all the other questions. Not what the wolves were, what she was. She did not have an answer yet. But the thread in her chest was pulling steadily southward, and the blue-white eyes would be back tonight, and the snow was still falling, and she was still walking. They came out of the trees without rushing, which was worse than if they had charged. One by one, then two at a time, stepping from the snow-heavy pines with a deliberateness that made Lyra think of ceremony. 12 wolves, large and winter-dark, moving into the clearing in a formation so considered it could not have been accidental. They did not snarl. They did not posture. They simply took their positions around her with the quiet efficiency of something that had done this before, that had perhaps been doing this for longer than she had been alive. And then they were still, and the circle was complete, and the clearing contained nothing except her and them and the soft, indifferent falling of snow. She had the stake in her right hand, and the knife loose in her left, and the cold, complete understanding that neither would matter. She had understood this since the third wolf appeared. She was holding them anyway because her hands needed something to do while the rest of her worked out what came next. The great wolf came last. The others parted for it without looking, a ripple moving through the circle from the northern tree line, each wolf simply stepping aside as though pulled by a current they all felt, and none of them questioned. It was the size of something that should not have been possible. Gray as iron filings, massive through the chest and shoulder, moving with a slowness that was not hesitation but weight, the weight of age, the weight of accumulated years that Lyra could feel pressing against her even from 20 feet away, like heat radiating through a stone wall. Its eyes were the same blue-white she had watched across 2 nights of no sleep, and up close, in daylight, they were not like an animal's eyes at all. They were like looking at something lit from very far away. It stopped at the edge of the circle and regarded her. The crescent mark on her collarbone ignited. That was the only word for it, ignited. A heat that had no right to exist in a frozen clearing, burning clean and focused against her skin through 2 layers of wool. She had carried that mark for 17 years and it had never done anything. It was doing something now. She pressed her fist against her sternum instinctively, knife and all, as though she could hold the sensation in place. Her legs stopped working. She went down onto both knees in the snow, not a decision, simply what happened when the strength went out all at once. She kept the stake up. She kept her eyes on the great wolf. Kneeling was not surrender. She needed to be very clear about that, at least to herself. It was simply where she was now. The thread in her chest was no longer pulling. It had gone taut as wire and stopped moving entirely, like something that had reached the end of its length. Above the ridge, she heard it, the vast, grinding percussion of 400 soldiers halting. The great wolf took one more step. They were level now, its massive head and her kneeling face occupying the same plane of cold air, close enough that she could see the individual guard hairs along its muzzle, close enough that when it exhaled, the vapor moved across her skin. Its eyes were extraordinary up close, not animal, not human. Something older than either, something that had been looking out from behind eyes like these since before Veldmore existed, since before the pass had a name, since before anyone had thought to be afraid of the dark between the trees. The pull in her chest stopped being a pull. It became a door, and the door opened. She did not decide to drop the stake. She became aware of it in the snow and her hands empty in the air above it, and the sequence of events between holding it and not holding it was simply absent, edited out, as though that moment belonged to a version of her that no longer existed. Her palms were open. Her fingers were spread. The cold touched every line of them. She spoke. The language arrived in her mouth the way a held breath arrives when you finally release it, not learned, not retrieved, not chosen, simply there, as though it had always been there, waiting in the space between her ribs for the precise conditions that would allow it out. She did not know what the words were. She knew exactly what they meant. I know you. I have always known you. I am the last. I am here. The covenant holds. The pack went still. Not one at a time. Simultaneously, completely, every wolf in the circle arresting mid-breath, as though the sound had reached all of them at once through something other than air. The clearing became a different kind of quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something so much larger than sound that noise became irrelevant beside it. The ancestor lowered its head. Slowly, with the gravity of a formal thing, it brought that great iron-gray head down and down until its muzzle touched the snow at her knees. The crescent mark on her collarbone went from burning to warm, the warmth of a coal at the end of its fire, steady and deep and no longer painful. She placed her hand on the wolf's head without thinking. Her fingers found the coarse winter fur, and she felt through her palm the age of it, 3 centuries of waiting rendered finally, irrevocably over. On the ridge above, nothing moved. 400 soldiers stood with swords drawn and torches raised, and not one of them made a sound. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere far above the canopy, a branch released its snow, and the soft impact of it reached the clearing like an afterthought. The king's General Sorin closed his hand on the king's arm. Neither of them spoke. The clearing below held a kneeling girl and 12 motionless wolves and an ancient creature with its head bowed in the snow, and there was simply no language available for it, not in any tongue any soldier on that ridge had ever been taught. The snow kept falling. The covenant held. Aldrich Stormvane had not sheathed his sword before assessing a situation in 11 years. He sheathed it now. He was aware of Sorin beside him, aware of 400 men at his back with weapons drawn and no target, aware of every tactical variable in the clearing below, the wolves, the girl, the position of the tree line, the exits. He assessed all of it in the span of 3 seconds and then set it aside, because none of it was the thing that was happening. The thing that was happening did not have a tactical variable. It had a girl kneeling in the snow with her hand on the head of a creature the oldest texts called extinct, and a silence coming up from the clearing like heat from the ground, and something moving inside his chest that had not moved in 6 years. He walked down the ridge slope alone. He heard Sorin start after him and stop, heard the ripple of uncertainty move through the column behind him, and he did not slow. The snow was deep on the slope, and his boots broke through the crust with each step. He kept his hands visible and his pace even, and he watched the pack as he descended, waiting for the moment they would turn toward him and close the circle. They parted. Each wolf simply stepped aside as he reached the clearing's edge, the same ripple he had watched them make for the great wolf, the same unhurried deference. He walked through the gap and stopped in front of the girl and looked at her. She was small, smaller than she had appeared from the ridge, slight through the shoulder, her coat too large, her scarf unraveling at one end where it had caught on something. There was blood-dried brown on her left cheek and snow in her hair, and her eyes, when they came up to meet his, were gray as the sky above the pass. Not frightened, not deferential. Simply steady, the way a thing is steady when it has already survived the worst and recalibrated accordingly. He asked her name. She told him without hesitation, without rank or village or any of the social scaffolding that people usually erected around themselves in the presence of a king. Just Lyra. A single word, standing alone, owing nothing to anyone. Sorin reached his side. He heard the sharp intake of breath, felt his general's hand come up toward his arm and stop short of touching it. "My king," Sorin's voice was very quiet. "The birthmark, her collarbone, she's Vakari, the last bloodline. The scholars said it died out 3 generations ago." Aldrich looked at the mark. Then he looked at Lyra, who was watching him with those gray eyes, waiting, the way someone waits who has been told what they are is not real often enough that they have stopped bothering to argue. His wolf was not frantic. It was not urgent or demanding or clawing. It was simply present, fully and quietly present for the first time in 6 years, like a room filling slowly with light. "Come with us," he said. "You will not be sent back." Corvath arrived on the 4th day with 6 men at his back and a rolled petition in his hand, and the expression of someone who had spent the entire journey rehearsing what he intended to say. He was shown into the great hall without delay, which he appeared to interpret as a promising sign. It was not. Aldrich had learned long ago that the most efficient way to end a thing was to let it begin. The hall was full. Word had moved through the stronghold the way word always moved, faster than anyone officially sanctioned, and the galleries above the main floor held twice their usual number of observers, all of them very carefully not appearing to watch. Corvath walked the length of the hall with his petition and his 6 men and his rehearsed expression, and then he stopped because of the wolf. The ancestor was lying at the foot of the council platform the way a hearthstone lies in a fireplace, massive and settled and permanent, its great head resting on its forepaws, its blue-white eyes tracking Corvath from the moment he entered with the patient attention of something that had taken his measure and found it unimpressive. Beside it, in a chair that had not previously been placed to the left of the king's seat, sat Lyra. She was clean and fed and wearing wool that fit her, and the crescent mark at her collarbone was visible above the neckline, unhidden, simply there. The way a thing is simply there when it no longer needs to apologize for existing. Corvath placed his petition on the council table. He spoke for several minutes. He used the word ward 4 times, and the word danger 3 times, and the phrase pack sovereignty twice, and he did not look at Lyra directly, which told Aldrich everything about the kind of courage the man possessed. Aldrich let him finish. Then he took the petition, unrolled it, read it in full, and set it down. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He went through the document the way a careful man goes through a flawed structure, locating each weakness and pressing on it with the quiet, sustained pressure of someone who has all the time in the world. The exile had been issued without formal tribunal, which under Crown law rendered it unlawful on its face. A Vakari bloodholder, by statutes older than Veldmore's founding charter, fell under direct Crown sovereignty. Corvath had never had jurisdiction, and the covenant Lyra had restored in the Ashvane Pass had already pulled the feral wolf attacks in 3 border territories into silence, something Aldrich's own commanders had been unable to achieve in 2 years of campaign. He let that sit for a moment. "You exiled the one person the goddess placed in your walls," he said, "to protect you from the thing you feared." Corvath left without his petition. The hall watched him go, and then it looked at the girl beside the throne with the ancient wolf at her feet, and it began, slowly and collectively, to understand what had come to Stormvane. The snow was still deep in the Ashvane, but the light had changed. It came earlier now and stayed longer, and at the edges of the day it carried a warmth that was more promise than fact, the kind of warmth that does not yet reach the skin, but registers somewhere below it, in the part of the body that keeps track of such things without being asked. Lyra woke before dawn to a stillness that was different from the usual stillness of the stronghold, and she lay in it for a moment with her eyes open, feeling the shape of it. Then she understood, and she got up. They had come in the night. 100 wolves, perhaps more, arranged in the outer courtyard with a patience, and a silence so complete that the night watch had not raised the alarm, had simply stood at their posts watching and apparently decided that whatever protocol covered this situation was above their authority to invoke. They sat in rows between the gate and the keep, dark shapes in the pale pre-dawn, breath rising in columns of vapor, every eye facing the door she was about to walk through. At their head, the ancestor stood alone. She went out barefoot because shoes felt wrong for it, felt like an argument she didn't want to make. The cold stone registered against her soles as she crossed the threshold, sharp and real and grounding. The crescent mark at her collarbone was uncovered. She had stopped covering it on the 5th day at Stormvane, quietly and without announcement, the way you stop doing something once the reason for doing it has been removed. The ancestor walked to her. She placed her hand on its great head, familiar now, the coarse winter fur, the warmth beneath it, the deep and wordless recognition that moved between them like current through water. The pack rose behind it as one, a single fluid motion, 100 wolves coming to their feet in silence, and the pull in Lyra's chest that had navigated her across 3 days of frozen wilderness simply settled into something steady and permanent, like a compass finding north and staying there. She stood in the courtyard with her hand on the ancestor's head, and she thought about the girl who had knelt in the snow in the Ashvane Pass, holding a wooden stake, and believed she was a curse. She thought about her with something that was not quite pity and not quite tenderness, but lived in the country between them. That girl had not been wrong about what she carried. She had only been wrong about what carrying it meant. There was a difference between cursed and chosen. She had learned it the way you learn most important things, not all at once, but in increments, one quiet day at a time. She turned. Aldrich was at the gate. He had not followed her out, had not moved to stand beside her or place himself in the frame of the moment. He was simply there, at the threshold, still, the way the ancestor had been still outside her firelight in the pass, present and unhurried, and making no demands on the space she occupied. His wolf was in his eyes in a way she had learned to recognize over the weeks of small evenings and careful conversation, visible and calm and no longer dormant. She heard it from where she was standing or felt it, which with him was the same thing. A long, slow exhale, a letting go, the sound a frozen thing makes when the thaw finally reaches it. The pack lay down around her in the courtyard, one by one, settling into the cold stone with the ease of creatures who had arrived somewhere they intended to stay. Lyra did not think about leaving. For the first time in her life, the thought simply did not come, did not present itself at the edge of her mind the way it always had in every doorway of every place she had ever stood. She was here. The stone was cold under her feet. The light was coming up gold over the eastern wall. She stayed,